Sometimes the deepest wound isn't what someone did to you. It's what you felt you had to become just to survive what they did. You wanted to explain yourself. You wanted them to understand. You wanted to send that message, make that phone call, defend your name, and finally say everything you'd been holding inside. Because when someone disrespects you, silence can feel like surrender. But what if it isn't? What if staying quiet isn't weakness? What if, in certain moments, silence is the clearest evidence that you've finally learned your own worth? Welcome back to Focus with Maya. Today we're talking about what happens after disrespect. That difficult moment when somebody crosses a line, hurts you, humiliates you, betrays your trust, or treats your kindness as though it were something they could take for granted. And perhaps the hardest part isn't their behavior. Perhaps the hardest part is deciding what you're going to do with the pain they left behind. Because anger will tell you to react. Pride will tell you to prove yourself. Hurt will tell you to make them feel what you felt. But wisdom asks a different question. What response protects your peace? There comes a point in life when you stop needing every person who hurt you to admit they were wrong. You stop chasing explanations from people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop knocking on doors that have already shown you they don't want to open. And something changes inside you. You begin to understand that not every battle deserves your voice. Some things are better answered by distance. Some disrespect is best answered by boundaries. And some people will understand your value only after they no longer have access to it. But there's something even deeper waiting beneath that silence. Something about dignity, healing, and the strange way life has of revealing people's choices without you having to expose them. Stay with me, because before we're finished, I want you to see silence in a completely different way. There is a moment after disrespect when your mind starts having a conversation your mouth never gets to hear. You replay the scene, you remember the exact words, the expression on their face, the way they dismissed you. You think about what you should have said, what you wish you'd said, and what you'll say if they ever do it again. And then, sometimes, you imagine proving them wrong. You imagine succeeding so loudly that they have no choice but to notice. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If your entire life becomes an answer to someone who hurt you, they're still controlling a piece of you. That's not freedom. Psychologically, this makes sense. When we're disrespected, our brain can interpret the experience as a threat to our social standing, identity, or sense of safety. That's why the desire to defend ourselves can feel almost physical. We want to restore balance. We want the other person to understand the damage they caused. But healing doesn't always come from making someone understand. Sometimes healing begins when you understand yourself. You understand why that person's opinion mattered so much. You understand why their rejection wounded you. You understand why you kept explaining yourself to someone who had already decided what they wanted to believe. And you stop asking, how can I make them see my worth? You begin asking, why did I ever place my worth in their hands? That question can change everything. Because silence becomes different when it comes from self-respect instead of fear. You're not silent because you have nothing to say. You're silent because you've realized that your peace is more valuable than winning an argument. Think about the last times you felt disrespected. Maybe it was a friend who suddenly became cold, a family member who constantly criticized you, a partner who took your patience for granted, a colleague who tried to make you feel small. You may never receive the apology you deserved. And that's painful. But your healing cannot depend on a person becoming mature enough to give you closure. Sometimes closure is the moment you decide you don't need to keep reopening the wound. And once you understand that, something begins to loosen inside you. Not because they changed, because you did. There is a difference between being quiet and being powerless. A powerless person may stay silent because they're afraid of what will happen if they speak. A wise person may stay silent because they've already decided what deserves their energy. Those two silences can look identical from the outside, but they come from completely different places. And learning the difference can change the way you move through your life. Maybe you've spent years being the person who explains everything. You explain why you're hurt. You explain why something wasn't fair. You explain your intentions. You explain your boundaries. You explain yourself to people who aren't really listening. You keep talking because somewhere inside you, you believe that if you can just find the right words, they'll finally understand. But some people don't misunderstand you. They understand you perfectly well, and they simply don't want to respect what you're saying. That's a difficult truth to accept. It means that sometimes the missing ingredient isn't better communication, it's their willingness to care. And you cannot communicate someone into having a conscience. You cannot reason someone into valuing what they have repeatedly chosen to disregard. You cannot force someone to recognize your heart. This is where emotional maturity begins to look different from emotional reaction. You stop trying to convince, you start observing. You notice who only respects your boundaries after you become angry. You notice who apologizes only when they fear losing access to you. You notice who keeps asking for your kindness while giving you reasons to withdraw it. And you begin making decisions based on patterns rather than promises. That doesn't mean becoming cold. Please don't confuse self-respect with bitterness. You can remain kind without remaining available to everyone. You can forgive without returning to the same situation. You can wish someone well without giving them another opportunity to wound you. That's a powerful kind of freedom. If you're choosing yourself again, write one word in the comments that represents that decision. Not a paragraph, not an explanation, just one word. Because sometimes naming what you're choosing helps you recognize that you've already begun changing. And there is another lesson waiting here, because once you stop reacting to disrespect, you have to learn something even harder: how to resist the temptation to become the person who hurt you. One of the hardest things about being hurt is resisting the temptation to hand that hurt to someone else. You know what it feels like to be dismissed, so part of you may want to make somebody else feel it's insignificant. You know what it feels like to be ignored, so you may want to ignore them harder. You know what it feels like to have someone question your worth, so you may secretly dream of the day when they're the one asking for your attention. That's human. But you don't have to become cruel just because someone was cruel to you. There is a quiet form of strength in refusing to let another person's behavior rewrite your character. Think about that for a moment. Someone can betray you without turning you into a betrayer. Someone can lie to you without making honesty foolish. Someone can disrespect you without convincing you that respect is no longer worth giving. Your pain may explain your anger, but it doesn't have to become your identity. This is where silence can become an act of self-protection rather than revenge. You don't have to announce that you're walking away. You don't need a dramatic farewell. You don't need to make sure everyone knows what happened. Sometimes you simply stop participating in what keeps hurting you. You answer less. You explain less. You argue less. And eventually, you notice something surprising. The person who once occupied your thoughts all day begins taking up less and less space. That is what healing can look like. Not forgetting. Not pretending it didn't matter. Just refusing to keep paying emotional rent for a person who no longer belongs in your life. And here's where people sometimes misunderstand karma. Karma doesn't have to mean sitting around waiting for someone to suffer. Real life has a quieter way of revealing consequences. People carry their habits with them. A person who constantly betrays trust eventually finds that people become careful around them. Someone who takes kindness for granted eventually discovers that kindness has limits. Someone who treats good people as disposable may one day look around and wonder why nobody stays. You don't have to arrange those consequences. You don't have to become the judge. Life has a way of allowing people to meet the results of their own choices. Your responsibility is simpler. Build a life so peaceful that you no longer need to watch theirs. Because the moment you stop waiting for karma, you become free to live. And freedom is where the real transformation begins. There is another kind of disrespect that can be even harder to recognize because it doesn't always arrive as an insult. Sometimes it looks like being taken for granted. You are always the one who checks in. You are always the one who forgives. You make room for their problems, their moods, their mistakes, their emergencies. You understand when they're busy. You give them another chance when they disappoint you. You tell yourself they're going through something. And slowly, almost without noticing, you become responsible for maintaining a relationship that only survives because you're carrying it. Then one day, you stop. You don't send the message. You don't make the call. You don't rescue the situation. And suddenly, you discover how much of the relationship depended on your effort. That realization can hurt. Because sometimes what we call loyalty is actually fear. We're afraid that if we stop giving, people will stop loving us. We're afraid that if we stop accommodating everyone, we'll be called selfish. We're afraid that if we establish a boundary, someone will leave. But ask yourself something honest. If someone only stays when you're overextending yourself, what exactly are you losing when they leave? That's not an easy question. Yet it may be one of the most important questions you'll ever ask. Healthy relationships don't require you to disappear inside them. Love should have room for your needs. Friendship should have room for your boundaries. Family should not become a permanent excuse for someone to mistreat you. And self-respect doesn't mean demanding perfection from people. It means paying attention to how you feel around them. Do you constantly feel anxious? Do you rehearse conversations before having them because you're afraid of their reaction? Do you leave interactions feeling smaller than when you arrived? Those feelings aren't always proof that someone is terrible, but they are information. Listen to them. You don't need to label everyone as toxic. You don't need to create enemies. You simply need enough honesty to recognize when something is no longer healthy for you. And then comes the difficult part, accepting that your boundary may disappoint someone. Let them be disappointed. Their discomfort with your boundary does not automatically mean your boundary is wrong. Sometimes the first person who gets upset when you start respecting yourself is the person who benefited from you not doing it. And when that happens, you may be tempted to explain. But remember what we're learning. You don't always need another explanation. Sometimes your changed behavior is the explanation. There comes a time when you realize that peace isn't something you find after everyone finally treats you correctly. Peace is something you begin protecting even when they don't. That's a different kind of maturity. Because if your emotional stability depends on other people behaving perfectly, you'll spend your life exhausted. Someone will misunderstand you. Someone will criticize you. Someone will leave without explaining. Someone will take your kindness and call it weakness. Someone will remember your mistakes and forget everything you've done right. And if you allow every opinion to become a verdict on your worth, you'll never feel settled inside yourself. You have to learn how to hear someone's judgment without automatically accepting it as truth. This doesn't mean becoming defensive. In fact, it requires the opposite. It requires enough confidence to ask, is there something I need to learn here? Sometimes criticism contains a lesson. Sometimes it contains someone else's insecurity. Sometimes it contains both. Your job is to separate the two. That takes emotional intelligence. Imagine someone says something hurtful about you. Your first instinct may be to reject everything they said. But instead of immediately fighting back, pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself whether there is anything useful hidden inside their words. If there is, take the lesson. If there isn't, leave the insult where it belongs. You don't have to swallow poison simply because someone offered it to you. And this is one reason silence can be so powerful. A pause gives you time to choose your response instead of surrendering it to your emotions. Maybe you wait before replying to the message. Maybe you sleep on the decision. Maybe you walk outside and let your body settle before having the conversation. That small space between what happens and what you do next can change the entire direction of your life. Because anger is often immediate, but wisdom needs room. You don't need to answer every accusation. You don't need to correct every rumor. You don't need to defend yourself before every audience. The people who truly know your character don't require a courtroom presentation. And the people determined to misunderstand you may not be persuaded by one. So let your life become evidence. Let your consistency speak. Let your character become louder than your explanations. There will be moments when staying quiet feels incredibly difficult. Stay with that feeling. Don't rush to escape it, because sometimes the person you are becoming is born in the few seconds when the old version of you desperately wants to react, and you choose differently. One of the greatest signs that you're healing is not that you stop remembering what happened. It's that you stop needing the past to change before you're willing to move forward. For a long time, you may have believed that peace would arrive when someone finally apologized. When they admitted what they did, when they recognized what they lost, when they came back and said, I was wrong, and maybe that day will come. But you cannot build your future around an apology that may never arrive. That's the trap. You keep one foot in yesterday, waiting for someone else to rewrite a chapter they already chose to write. Meanwhile, your life is still moving. Morning comes. The seasons change. People grow. Opportunities appear, and you remain emotionally standing in the same room, hoping someone will finally say the words that give you permission to leave. Give yourself that permission. You don't need their apology to know that you were hurt. You don't need their agreement to know that a boundary became necessary. You don't need their regret to begin rebuilding your confidence. Healing sometimes means accepting an incomplete ending, and incomplete endings are uncomfortable because the human mind likes resolution. We want a clear reason. We want a final conversation. We want everything to make sense, but life doesn't always give us that. Sometimes the lesson is hidden inside the uncertainty. You learn that not every question needs an answer. Not every relationship needs to be repaired. Not every person who leaves needs to be chased. And not every door that closes is a punishment. Some doors close because you've spent too long standing in places where you were never allowed to fully become yourself. Maybe you've been waiting for someone to validate your worth. Stop waiting. Look at the quiet things you've survived. Look at the mornings you got out of bed when your heart felt heavy. Look at the times you kept going without anyone applauding. Look at the kindness you maintained after disappointment tried to harden you. Those things matter. You may not realize it, but every time you choose dignity over revenge, you're teaching yourself that your peace has value. Every time you walk away from an argument that would only drain you, you're strengthening a part of yourself. Every time you refuse to chase someone who has made their choice, you're practicing emotional independence. And eventually, something beautiful happens. You stop asking whether they miss you. You start asking whether you miss who you were when you were constantly trying to earn their approval. That question may lead you somewhere you didn't expect. Because sometimes what you're grieving isn't the person. It's the version of yourself you had to become to keep them. There is a quiet strength that comes when you no longer need to be witnessed in everything you do. You don't need everyone to know that you're healing. You don't need to announce that you've moved on. You don't need to post a message hoping one particular person will recognize themselves in it. You don't need to become successful just so someone who underestimated you will regret it. At some point, your life has to stop being a performance for people who once made you feel small. Let them think whatever they want. Let them misunderstand the silence. Let them assume you've forgotten. Let them wonder why you don't respond anymore. Your peace doesn't need a press release. This is especially difficult in a world where everything can become public. A disagreement becomes a post. A breakup becomes a story. A private wound becomes something strangers are invited to judge. But some of the most important changes in your life will happen where nobody is watching. You'll wake up one morning and realize you didn't check their page. You'll notice that you went an entire afternoon without replaying the argument. You'll hear their name and feel something, but it won't control your mood. You'll pass a place connected to the past and keep walking. These moments may seem ordinary. They're not. They're evidence that your nervous system is learning that the danger has passed. Healing is often less dramatic than we imagine. Sometimes it's simply the absence of an old reaction, and you should celebrate that. Not because you're becoming indifferent, but because you're becoming less dependent on someone else's behavior to determine how you feel about yourself. That's emotional freedom. But there's an important distinction here. Silence should not become a hiding place. If someone is genuinely harming you, speak to someone you trust. If a relationship requires a difficult conversation, have it when you are calm enough to be honest. If you need to say no, say no. The goal isn't to swallow your voice. The goal is to stop wasting your voice where it cannot create understanding. There are people who deserve your honesty. There are conversations worth having. There are relationships worth repairing. And there are situations where the healthiest sentence is simply, "This is no longer acceptable to me." Then comes the courage to live according to what you said. That's where boundaries become real. Not when you announce them, when you keep them. And once you begin living that way, you may discover something unexpected. You don't become harder. You become clearer. You still love. You still care. You still believe in people. But you stop confusing compassion with permission, and that distinction can protect your heart without closing it. There will come a day when you realize that the greatest response to disrespect isn't making someone regret hurting you. It's becoming so deeply rooted in your own life that their opinion no longer decides who you are. That doesn't happen overnight. It happens through small choices. You choose not to send the message. You choose to finish the work. You choose to take care of your body. You choose to spend time with people who don't make you question whether you're wanted. You choose to learn something new. You choose to laugh again. You choose to make plans that have nothing to do with the person who hurt you. At first, these choices may feel almost meaningless, but they're not. Every healthy decision is a vote for the person you're becoming. And eventually, you begin to notice that your attention has returned to you. That is a profound shift, because disrespect often steals more than a moment. It can steal attention. You replay conversations while driving. You think about what they meant while you're trying to sleep. You imagine future confrontations while brushing your teeth. The event happened once, but your mind keeps making you experience it again. You deserve to stop paying for the same pain repeatedly. That doesn't mean forcing yourself to forget. It means refusing to rehearse the injury as though your suffering might somehow change the past. Ask yourself, what would I do with all this mental energy if I stopped giving it to them? Maybe you'd create something. Maybe you'd repair a relationship that actually matters. Maybe you'd finally pursue something you've been postponing. Maybe you'd simply rest. Don't underestimate that last one. Sometimes healing isn't about becoming more productive. Sometimes it's about becoming safe enough inside yourself to rest without feeling guilty. And when you reach that place, you begin understanding why silence can be such a powerful answer. You're not waiting for karma anymore. You're not watching for their downfall. You're not checking whether they noticed your absence. You're living. That's the part nobody can take from you. And perhaps this is the real meaning behind letting karma speak. You don't need to orchestrate consequences. You don't need revenge dressed up as justice. You simply step out of the way and allow people to live with the patterns they choose. Meanwhile, you choose differently. You choose honesty. You choose boundaries. You choose patience without self-abandonment. You choose forgiveness without returning to what broke you. You choose love without begging to be loved back. And one day, you may look back at the person who once had the ability to disturb your entire world and realize something astonishing. They didn't become less powerful. You simply stopped handing them your power. That's the moment silence stops being an absence of words. It becomes a declaration. My life belongs to me again. And there is one final step, perhaps the most important one, because knowing what you deserve means very little until you begin living as though you believe it. Maybe you've been waiting for someone to realize what they did to you. Maybe you've imagined the apology, the regret, the moment when they finally understand that they underestimated the wrong person. But I want you to consider something more freeing. What if you stopped waiting? What if your healing didn't require their realization? What if your future didn't depend on their apology? You can acknowledge what happened without allowing it to become the place where your life stops. You can say, that hurt me. You can say, I deserve better. And then you can say, but I refuse to spend the rest of my life proving it. That is dignity. Not pretending you weren't hurt. Not becoming cold. Not pretending you don't care. Dignity is caring for yourself enough to stop returning to places that repeatedly require you to abandon yourself. So the next time someone disrespects you, pause before you react. Ask yourself whether your response is coming from wisdom or from the wound. If you need to speak, speak with clarity. If you need to leave, leave with dignity. If you need distance, take it. And if silence is the healthiest answer, let it be silence without resentment. You don't have to wish suffering upon anyone. You don't have to monitor their life. You don't have to wait for karma to prove that you were right. Let people carry the consequences of their own choices. Your responsibility is to carry your life with care. Take your attention back. Take your confidence back. Take your mornings back. Take your laughter back. Take back the parts of yourself you handed over while trying to be understood by someone who wasn't willing to understand you. And please remember this. Becoming stronger doesn't mean becoming less kind. You can have boundaries and still have compassion. You can forgive and still walk away. You can love someone and know that loving them from a distance is healthier than keeping them close. That is not weakness. That is wisdom earned through experience. So if someone has disrespected you, don't make your next chapter about revenge. Make it about restoration. Build quietly, heal honestly, grow without announcing every step. Let your character speak when words are unnecessary. Let your consistency speak when people doubt you. Let your peace speak when someone expects a reaction. And let life reveal what it needs to reveal. You don't need to be the author of someone else's consequences. You need to become the author of your own next chapter. If this message spoke to you, subscribe to Focus with Maya for more meaningful motivation and life-changing wisdom every week. And if you believe someone in your life needs to hear this, like this video, and share it with them. Sometimes one message reaches a person at exactly the moment they needed it. You have survived moments that once convinced you they would break you. You are still here, so don't spend tomorrow fighting yesterday. Walk forward with your dignity intact, your heart still open, and your peace no longer available for negotiation. Let them speak, let them judge, let them misunderstand. You don't have to answer everything. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is the life you choose to live. Be so at peace with who you are that disrespect no longer has the authority to tell you who you should become.